It's the intel about the next generation of Bulldogs. This is Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger.
Let's go, I'm a Bulldog.
Hello, Dog Nation, and welcome into Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Dog Nation recruiting insider Jeff Sentell. Over the last few weeks, we spent a lot of time talking about when we would know something more about the five-star quarterback Jared Curtis. Well, now we know when he plans to make his decision. He announced on Instagram and on X that he would be making his decision May 5th. It's between Georgia and Oregon, and even though May 5th really isn't that far away in the grand scheme of things, if you're a Dog fan, this feels like a lot of time to wait for such a big prospect.
It does. First of all, you would think, there's surface level here and then there's the deeper level, and we'll try to get to both. But surface level, he makes you think, like, he's not going to wear number 5. He doesn't wear number 5 in high school. 5'5", wouldn't that be great? Because most people don't know this, but when he teased his announcement on his Instagram that night, that was like one day after he committed to Georgia the year earlier. So like internet sleuth guys were like, man, it's symbolism. He's going to parallel the recommitment. Yeah, not so much. But we got one prediction here, and one prediction here is pretty clear. Either in Eugene, Oregon, or Athens, Georgia, Cinco de Mayo, they're going to sell a lot of margaritas that day because there's going to be some really good news coming that way. Kaylee, I guess, what I think here, it kind of changes with more information that I get here. I think, first of all, it's going to be too late. If both of these schools are waiting on May the 5th to get the word, that's not going to set them up well at all for their next best contender, their bronze medal, their silver medal. I don't think this silver medal guy might be available. They might go down to rung 3, rung 4 on the food chain there. I think what you got to do is you got to reach a point with another quarterback, and if you feel good about maybe the commitment or the connection there with like a Landon Duckworth, who now says that Ole Miss is his clear leader and Georgia's like maybe 2, 3, or 4. Bo Bentley just visited Georgia. He was blown away by the practice. We've talked about him on this show, but Kaylee, this is very risky business, ma'am, for you to sit there and wait until May 5th. And then if you're not the guy, you're not the team, you got to find somebody else in scrambling, because this is a very much a high school thing here, because everyone that really likes Georgia and is having to wait on Jared Curtis or Oregon in the same situation, they notice that. They know they're not the number one guy.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be the safety valve or the backup plan. So this is going to be high-level recruiting, because I think both schools can get a really good quarterback after the fact, but it's really late, Kaylee. Most of these decisions are done by May, or at least they're backdoor done by May. So maybe that's what happens, because it's really different. Kaylee, he could agree to terms with any school he wants and just wait until the 5th. And if you're said school, you feel a lot better about the waiting game. But if you don't have anything ironclad or you don't have anything on paper, it's going to get very interesting. In some cases, there's some schools of thought here where it's like, if you told me Georgia could get a yes, I'm your guy from Bo Bentley in the middle of April, I'd have to think really hard about that.
See, in my head, I'd like to think that if you set your commitment decision for May 5th in your head, you already know what decision you want to make. But I will say I've been watching The Bachelor lately, and this situation kind of reminds me of The Bachelor, because if you're Jared Curtis, you could give one of these two schools all the reassurance in the world, but what it really comes down to is that final 24 hours. So I like to think that he knows, but, now that the schools know the date, they're going to be trying to date him harder than ever in hopes that he'll make that decision go in their way. So that's my girl math.
So really good girl math. Couple of things. He's currently slated to visit Georgia again for G-Day. Will that happen? We'll have to wait and see. Does he go out and then visit Oregon again? Also a wait and see thing there as well. The other thing, this is being handled by representation. This is being handled by agents. So there's a lot of things to look at here, like, where this will go, what the negotiations will be like. But, I was told coming out of that last visit to Georgia that it would be soon, and apparently it wasn't. I've been told now that Jared needs some time to digest this thing a little bit more. So apparently he needs about 40 more days to digest it. So that's going to be very interesting with a 5-star quarterback. Is it all or nothing here with one of these guys? I would think it's trending like that.
So enough on Jared Curtis for now. We will revisit this on May 5th when he makes that decision.
Probably talk about it every week. That's what we do.
Yeah, I say that.
Yeah.
But why don't we show you what we've got going on today's episode of Before the Hedges. you're at the point now where you're on the recruiting trail and maybe there's some familiar names and the guys that you grew up watching play, now they have sons that are kind of on the trail as well. So more on that. Who are those legacies? Could any of them end up at Georgia? Then we'll take a look at 5 of the 6 commits in the 2026 class and basically the stability of their commitment. How much are they a dog? Is it 100% or is anybody trying to come in and poach these guys? Then we'll do a continuation of our Next Generation series where we take a look at the guys who are already signees within the class of 2025 and what they bring to the table for the Dogs. And this week it's going to be the athlete Todd Robinson. Then Sentell's Mail is back for part 2. Hopefully we can get some questions answered, but let's go ahead and start with this. So, as I mentioned before, some of the guys that you grew up watching on TV, now their sons are at the point where they're getting into college and they're playing at a high level of football. Just from a personal standpoint, what does that make you feel like, seeing all these familiar last names?
Yeah, so there's a lot. First of all, Kaylee, in the state of Georgia, these are these moments that make you feel a little old, and it's not just a fellow like me that's a veteran reporter. I know a way to make Kaylee feel a little old, because in the state of Georgia, this week a young man was offered by Tulane, and we got to see a full shot here so we can get Kaylee's great reaction here. Kaylee, there's a class of 2031 offer now in the state of Georgia to Tulane. That is a 7th grader. How do you feel about that, ma'am?
I mean, I'm not there yet, but whenever he graduates, I'll be 31. So ask me how I feel about it then, because I know the way I feel about it right now.
Yeah. Georgia's actually offered a 2029 recruit at Milton High School, Landon G., older brother going to Auburn. But I finally just said, well, wait a minute. Kaylee, we got to talk about this on Hedges, because there's so many dog legacy sons of dogs that are kind of in the Georgia sphere right now, whether they've gotten an offer, whether they've gotten consideration, whether they're currently on the team. I know you're not a dog fan if you can't name a couple legacies on the Georgia football team, but Kaylee, it's becoming staggering, ma'am, how many UGA legacies, sons of dogs, are currently popping up on the recruiting trail.
All I know is that I'm way too young to be feeling this old right now. So let's just go ahead and flash the slide. We've got 3 of them for you. The first one, so this way you'll see it's laid out is you've got the son on the left with either their grade, their position, the school that they're committed to, or their graduating class, and then you've got their dads on the right. So, just kind of in the grand scheme of things, I think it's really fascinating with this group to look at, okay, what position did their dad play and what position are they playing? Because, for the fathers of this group, it would be assumed naturally that the sons would follow in their footsteps, but I think that these guys have a really good insight of what players thrive at the next level or what position groups thrive at the next level. You even see that with Mike Bobo and Drew Bobo. Mike Bobo being a quarterback and having his son be an offensive lineman.
Yeah, it's probably not exactly wanting to follow in your dad's shoes, because listen, if you go to Georgia and you play and you make a name for yourself at Georgia, then obviously there's some footsteps there in terms of, or I've got to live up to what my dad's shoes are, stunting like my daddy. That's what, everybody knows that, right? So there's a couple things here. I want to maybe put a 10,000 foot view on this to begin with. Number one, Kaylee, the odds here are kind of interesting because Georgia has basically 85 scholarship players a year. And then you've got to think that guy was good enough to play at Georgia. And then they grow up, they have children, and then that son is good enough to be kind of on the recruiting trail with an offer from Georgia, or maybe being recruited by Georgia, or just a 4-star or 3-star in the class. So there's a lot of names here I want to click through. The first one you see there is Caleb Bell. Now he just graduated from Milton. He's on the way to Arkansas. He'll go play for Coach Pitt, but his dad was an incredible transfer out of Georgia military, out of the Augusta area. Kendrell Bell went on to play with the Steelers, was the NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year. You see Drew Bobo right there, Kaylee, very integral part of this team, probably underrated about how much he's going to mean to this current Georgia Bulldog team for the 2025 year. It's hard to believe he's a redshirt junior. He's been there that long, when it just seems like Drew's finally going to get his licks right now, going to get his reps right now. Obviously, father of Mike, Thomas Davis Jr. Now, this is interesting, Kaylee, because he is committed to Notre Dame. He's a 4-star linebacker committed to Notre Dame, but he does not have an offer from Georgia. So he was almost good enough to go anywhere in the country. Notre Dame's a really good school, but he didn't get an offer from Dad's school right there. So he's a 4-star linebacker already committed to Notre Dame. Carter Lucky, that Lucky name is familiar there. Mike Lucky, the linebacker, one of the Lucky triplets right there. He's at Norcross. He's a 4-star DL. He will appear on the top targets as well. You guys know that name, but there's a lot more than these guys.
Yeah, and then on the next page, you've got the other Lucky, the one who's currently already on the Georgia team. It's Lawson Lucky again, son of Mike Lucky, who was a linebacker. Lawson goes on to be a tight end. And then you've got the Jacobs brothers, who we're going to hear from in a second. But first, let's focus on Kedrick Golston II, who had some very exciting news to post on social media. We'll show it to you here. He's the son of Kedrick Golston. He is going to be taking an official visit June 13th through 15th. I mean, that's such a full circle moment, and I know that his dad has to be super proud, but also probably feel a little bit old at the same time. Interesting
here. Number one, he's a namesake. It's not actually a junior because you have a different middle name, so that's why you're just the second. That's what I've been told how that works. His dad was a defensive lineman. But he has been offered as a linebacker, and Coach Uzo Duribe is the edge coach at Georgia, and he's the one that got tagged in that tweet here. But you know, I thought a member of our team had a really good reaction to this, and I want to bring in the ace Cody Chaffins here because listen, this is my life. I see these kids. We have done Justice Haynes. I've done Marcus Washington Jr. I've done a lot of players that were Georgia legacies, but Cody, my man, what did you think when you saw Mr. Golston's OV here?
Yeah, I think what stuck out to me is the way Kaylee kind of started the segment was talking about, hey, these are guys you watched on TV growing up, and now it's their kids. And so, yeah, I think, okay, yeah, like Garrison Hurst's son is a backup running back. That's a cool story. No. Kedrick Golston was there when I was there. Like that was, and I like to think it wasn't that long ago. Apparently it was that long ago. But Kedrick Golston, it's something about it just hit me different than all of the other ones. Even Veron Haynes, that was a little bit before. Bruce Thornton, we saw his son go, is playing at Florida now. But, yeah, that one just struck me a little different. And Kedrick Golston, I was looking him up. He played 10 years in the NFL, now a head coach coaching high school football, which is cool too. But, yeah, that one just struck me a little different. These aren't people I watched growing up. These are people I was in school with.
I tell you, there's Cody. He jumps in on a Before the Hedges segment and he feeds the trees.
Star
you know what I mean?
Show, always.
Just feeds the trees. That's what Cody does.
All right, so let's take a look at the Jacobs brothers here. All right, so it's a 2-for-1 special. We can go back, yeah. Both sons of David Jacobs. You've got one who is a 5-star edge in the class of 2027, a top 10 prospect, I believe. And then you've got Dawson Jacobs, defensive lineman, who's the class of 2028. So right there together, you actually got a chance to sit down and talk with them. So here is David and Dawson Jacobs on being a legacy.
Your dad, he's a good dude. I love talking to him. He's like, I said, how's he doing? He's like, man, he's doing pretty good. I'll never tell him that, but he's doing pretty good. What sort of feedback do you get from your dad? Does he always give you like, well, you're pretty good right there. You didn't let the reach block get you. You set the edge. I mean, what sort of feedback when it's good do you hear from him?
That's good.
Yeah. Does he ever say like, well, you made the tackle, good job?
He's more of a, yeah, he does sometimes. He gives me credit sometimes. He's more of like a, even though you made a good play, you did something wrong in that play. You know, like he'll always find a way. He'll always find something that I did good turn out bad. You know, so yeah.
I feel like without stepping on any toes, that Georgia's always going to be one of those, I guess, in-game schools or like last-minute schools that they're going to be in it till the end. Mm-hmm. Why does Georgia make so much, or why is Georgia one of the schools you'll always pay close attention to?
Because I mean, my dad went there. My family, I mean, most of my family is around Georgia. So I mean, just Georgia's. I mean, plus I live in Georgia, you know, and it's always a hometown team. So I mean, Georgia will always be somewhat close to my heart because when I was younger, I always used to go to Georgia games, used to be at everything. So yeah, and plus my godfather, Mark Rick. Yeah.
When you think Georgia football, what comes to your mind?
Georgia football, like as in Georgia football, like high school or like
No, Georgia
college?
Football. Yeah.
Georgia football?
Like when you see the Dawgs play defense, what do you know you're going to get?
I know I'm going to see some highlights. That's what I know I'm going to see. I know I'm going to see some hard hitting, some good coaching, some good pass rush, some good covering, everything all around. Georgia defense, they got it.
What's it like being the son of a Dawg?
I would say it's great because it just gives us a lot of connections, but also just it also just gives me something. I have to prove something because he was so great in high school and just college, and I just gotta show them why I am the son of David Jacobs.
Wow.
So interesting there. Dawson just picked up his offer from Georgia. It's kind of funny. He doesn't even have stars yet, but he finally got the offer. Georgia was a little late. Like Texas offered him last year, his freshman year. Tennessee, Rodney Garner, the guy that coached David Jacobs at Georgia, is still the defensive line coach now at Tennessee in the SEC. He's been recruiting the Jacobs boys really heavy. DJ, he's what you want, Kaylee. He's a 5-star, top 10 prospect. You see him there at G-Day. DJ told me something pretty cool at the Under Armour Atlanta camp. He said there's one coach that he has a relationship better than any other, and that's Kirby Smart, the head coach at Georgia. He's been on a first-name basis with Kirby for forever, and he thinks it's really cool how his class is not on deck yet for DJ, but every time he goes to Athens, Kirby makes a point to spend some time. And listen, he's a legacy. Everybody gets that. His dad was a great player, revered by a lot of Georgia people, especially for the close of his story where he had to bounce back from some real adversity there. But DJ is a 5-star in anybody's book in the class of 2027.
So when we debut the 2027 top targets, where is he going to fall on the list?
Probably 1, 2, or 3. He'll probably stick there. And then you saw what he had to say there is he's like, listen, I'm not trying to step on any toes here, but Georgia's going to be in it for you always. And he's like, I think mom went to Georgia, lots of family members as well. Now, he's been to USC, he's been to Miami, all those big schools. You're a 5-star. He's 6'5", guys. He's 230. He's prototype. I saw him play a couple times last year. He is one of the best players in the state of Georgia. The apple fell directly below the tree here with DJ, and it's interesting with Dawson now because he just picked up the offer, I believe, last weekend from Georgia. So now both the Jacobs boys have been offered by the Georgia Bulldogs, and it gets really interesting.
I imagine this will not be the last time we are speaking about both of those two. We've got one more page for you guys, and it's going to be starting first with the son of David Pollock, Nicholas Pollock, who's a defensive end and a tight end in the class of 2028. Then you've got London Seymour, who's already a freshman defensive lineman at Boston College. Brody Talbert, the son of linebacker Brandon Talbert. He actually just committed to Samford 2 days ago. Yeah. And then lastly, you've got Braden Tyson, who's a 4-star running back in the class of 2027. Is that somebody else who could be on Georgia's radar?
Well, so Tyson, he plays at Brookwood. And he's very big. He's like 6'2", 225, 230 already. Been that way since he's been in high school. There's some talk a little bit about him potentially reclassifying. Oh. We'll have to watch on that one. But big, capable running back. I think it gets harder for him to become a dog if he reclassifies to 2026 because, listen, we can talk for a whole show about Georgia's running back targets in the 2026 class. But, those are very interesting. Nicholas Pollock, I liked what I saw out of Nicholas. I think if memory serves, I think he's a 2027. We might have created that graphic the wrong way. But, he was at North Oconee this year. He was a sophomore. David's not going to – it's funny how these dog dads are. They're kind of just like DJ with his dad. I talked to David about his son, and the coaching staff was like, yeah, he's going to be a good one. He's going to have the offers. And David's like, he's not really worth any of the ink yet. We don't need to be writing about Nicholas yet. But you watch Nicholas, very smart football player, highly intelligent football player. He's training at defensive end and linebacker. I think this year will be the year. He probably stacks on some weight. David tells me he's a very analytical young man. David was like when he was growing up, he's like, let's put the ball, I got to tackle that guy good. But then his son, Nicholas, is very analytical. He's like, what are we doing here? Why are we doing here? Why is the field this long? Why are there 11 players? Why are we in this coverage? Why are we doing this? He's going to analyze everything, very cerebral, the young Pollock. And we know the young man's going to play smart, play intelligent football with a high motor if his last name's Pollock.
Well, on this topic as a whole, obviously I'm not a 5-star athlete who followed in the footsteps of a dad who was also a 5-star athlete, but as someone who sort of followed in the footsteps of the same pathway, having a dad like that who can share experiences with you, it's great because you always have someone who is a great coach and a great motivator and who can teach you so much, but also is not afraid to criticize you when need be. You have to be willing to take that criticism, obviously, but you know that you always have someone in your corner that at the end of the day, even when they're telling you, maybe something you don't want to hear. They're always trying to guide you down the right path. And I also thought that the Jacobs brothers kind of put that into perspective well. It's like, okay, well, I can do something great, but they might find the flaw, but at the end of the day, like, that makes you better. And so to see all of these guys who are sons of former Dogs and knowing that they had that special relationship of football that bonds them together, I think it's something a lot bigger than ourselves.
Very nice. I like the way you said that. Very, very, very wise, Kaylee.
Thank you.
One of the things that you pick up on is, this is an example from C.J. Wiley's dad, the current Georgia Bulldog freshman. And C.J. Wiley's dad was like, Chuck, Charles, he was like, you know, I just brought him to as many things as I could, like alumni, Letterman, NFLPA, back to games for homecoming. And he's like, I didn't need to say it. I just had him hang around my teammates. And his teammates gave him all that advice because, listen, sometimes we're all going to tune mom and dad out when they're like this with so much advice, even if it's great advice. But when you hear it from, oh, this guy played in the NFL, or this guy's a doctor now, or this guy was an all-SEC guy, CJ kind of grew up around that. And CJ said, like, and Chuck kind of felt that kind of helped shape CJ with what he needed to do right now. And you can imagine with all of these guys on this list, they've probably been to Athens at least 25 times growing up. They go to weddings, they go to barbecues, they go to the cookouts, and they're all around each other. And being a part of that, I think that helps rise up them in terms of, hey, connections. Like, you know, if David says this guy's legit, well, he's going to get written about and the offers will happen really quickly. The same thing for all these players. I mean, the Jacobs, their father, David, is the defensive line coach at Blessed Trinity. He coaches both of them right now.
A program on the rise, too.
Yeah, so like, you see, it's kind of like, I really just like this story. I'm glad we could get to it right now because there's so many things. I know the Georgia people, they like hearing about their revered former Dogs as much as we do Before the Hedges or whatever. And it's kind of cool how a lot of these players are coming full circle and coming way back through. Now, the last thing I'll say about this, and it's a good segment, but the last thing I'll say about this is we started it off trying to make you feel a little old. I want to tell you, this is going to make me feel old. When I was a wee lad, and Munson was on the call, there was a running back at Georgia by the name of, this is post-Herschel, but this was a running back in Georgia. I want to say this is late 80s, maybe mid-80s, but his name was Cleveland Gary. Great running back. I think he eventually transferred on to Miami or whatever. Cleveland Gary III is now a prospect in the 2026 or 2027 class, I want to say. And now Georgia hasn't offered him yet, but we're getting into thirds here. And I'm not that old enough to know some thirds. But that to me sits there and goes, you start doing the math and you're like, okay, this generation was in college, the next generation was in college. When you've got a third, now listen, there's somebody watching this show that remembers Cleveland Gary and remembers Munson calling his name. There is now Cleveland Gary III that is a prospect being recruited by college football.
Well, I'm glad that this ended with you feeling like the old one because I did not start out great there. So in just a moment, we'll take a look at 5 of the 6 commits in the 2026 class and tell you how stable is their commitment into being a Dog. But first, here on Before the Hedges, we are always brought to you by Kroger, and now is a great time to start thinking about Kroger Boost. We tell you about it week in and week out, but now you can try it free for 30 days, and you can save up to $1,000 per year with 2 times the fuel points, and the best part about it is free grocery delivery. I was actually leaving my apartment to come to work this morning, and I saw a Kroger grocery delivery truck coming into my apartment complex. So I know someone was making good use out of it, and I hope that you'll take our advice and do the same. You can do that by visiting Kroger.com/boost. That's Kroger.com/boost to sign up today. So I've always heard the saying that recruiting really starts when you commit somewhere else. So we're going to revisit 5 of the 6 commits in the 2026 class and see how do things stand with them. And we're going to do it quick 5 style. 2 weeks in a row, we've got to put our 5s up. I kind of missed that. All right, let's start with the wide receiver Vance Spafford. So he's been committed to Georgia since November 5th of last year. Now he's out of Mission Viejo, California, which is obviously USC territory, and USC offered right after Vance Spafford made his decision. Where do things stand with him, and is it just like it was a matter of just waiting for one of those schools closer to offer?
Yeah, it's interesting. Right now, Vance is saying it's basically like he's being represented by a script writer, and he's saying all the right things now about he still loves Georgia. He's going to go visit Georgia in a couple of weeks. I believe next weekend he'll be back in Athens. Georgia still continues to see him as a priority. He feels like a priority. Kaylee's a top 100 receiver. He's out in California. I'm going to go back to the roots of this recruitment. When he told me, he's like, man, I've lived in California all my life. I want to see a different experience, a different world for my college years. And for the longest time, yeah, cheaper everything, cheaper eggs. For the longest time, he's thought about going to play in the SEC because that's where the best ball is played. And Ole Miss and Georgia were really on his radar early. Georgia nailed it down. Kaylee, this guy has 4.3 speed in the 40. He is electric. Right now, everybody's trying. USC, UCLA, Washington. A lot of those schools were in late on Vance Spafford, and I think Georgia's been able to hold on to some roots there with Vance Spafford.
So we'll move on to the safety Zach Fort, who's been a commit since January 30th of this year. Now, he is from Bradenton, Florida, which is IMG, and when you go to IMG, there's always those Florida schools that kind of lurk. Your University of Florida's, your Miami's, your Florida State's. Is he still a lock, or could one of those Florida schools come in and sweep him away?
I think he's going to take some visits. I think he's going to kick the tires on his decision. But, Kaylee, I would say this is one of the more stable commitments in the class with Zach Fort, basically because this is a uniquely wired individual, kind of like Javon Bullard type, Tyke Smith type, Kamari Lassiter type. He will be a 4-year captain this year at IMG. Basically unheard of. He was a captain his freshman year. He has total respect of every one of his teammates on the Ascenders. We got to go back to the fundamentals here, the roots here. He committed to Georgia silently, Kaylee, after the Tennessee win. Great environment. Recruits still talk to me about that game, how they couldn't hear each other in the stands. They had to go take some ibuprofen or headache medicine when they got home. But Ford is a guy that made this silent commitment after the Tennessee game, and then was still good with it in January. And he's like, man, let me just make this thing real. So he's going to visit Notre Dame. He's going to visit Miami. He's going to visit a couple other schools. But right now, I think this one is also pretty much terra firma.
I think the one that I'm a little bit concerned about, just because of the things I've seen, is the cornerback Jontavius Wyman, who's been a commit since July 27th of last year. But I saw that he has now scheduled official visits to Miami, Arizona State, and Nebraska. Is this really something to be concerned about?
I think it's a watch. I think as long as Georgia still prioritizes him and makes him feel the love, he's actually supposed to be back in Athens either today or tomorrow. I know it was this week. I've been told, people in the know tell me that he's just looking around. He's just checking his options. But, Kaylee, the thing we got to remember here is he was an early commitment. He committed before his junior year. But, like, I remember last year watching highlight after highlight of this guy, whether it's punt returns, kick returns, wildcat quarterback, as a receiver. You see him on a broken field on an interception. There's a lot to like about Jontavius's game. Be very interesting what happens if Miami rolls up the dollars on him and he feels, just kind of lukewarm about the way Georgia sees his future.
So now let's move on to Seven Cloud, who's coming from JUCO. Now here's the thing: is he's taken some visits to Auburn, taken some visits to Florida State, but I mean, for him, I know he wanted it to be one of those full circle moments, because in high school he was committed to Georgia, then some things happened and he didn't go, and thought that's where he wanted to finish out his career. So is this just background noise?
I think so. I think it's him just taking visits that he's earned. He's a rare junior college kid that I think he visited Auburn this past week. He visited Florida State this past week. Georgia, Kaylee, just simply put, feels like home to Seven Cloud. He has a touching story where he lost his father, but one of his dad's dreams was always to see him in Athens between the hedges playing for Georgia. And I think that really means something to Seven Cloud and his family. Kaylee, Georgia's going to prioritize him because he's literally would be a senior on next year's team if he would have went to Georgia in the class of 2023 when he was initially committed, but took a detour, took a long way to Athens, Georgia through El Dorado, Kansas, I believe. Can't get there on the GPS, but that's the way he's gone, and I think that one's still pretty solid.
So last one is Lincoln Keys. committed November 17th. For me, this one feels pretty solid too because you go look at the recruiting profile. The only official visit scheduled for him is Georgia. That gives me some clarity.
Yeah, this is another guy. We talked earlier about the Tennessee weekend. Well, he fell in love with Georgia before that, and then he was like, Mom, I want to play here. And he basically committed right there on the field to his mother in the middle of the Georgia-Tennessee game. I guess it helped that Georgia has the Brock Bowers legacy position at tight end, but he also saw Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky go off with a lot of plays against the Vols. He just feels like Georgia's different. Michigan wanted him. He's really in the backdoor neighborhood community of Ann Arbor and Michigan, but he wants to be a Dog. He wants to play for Todd Hartley. He wants to play for Georgia. I think that's one of the more stable commitments in the class right now.
All right, and so that's going to wrap up our quick five here. In just a moment, we'll continue our Next Generation series, but now summer's getting close. It's right around the corner. You got to start thinking about those summer vacations, and even if you've kind of waited till the last minute to do that, I think Daytona Beach is a great option because it's so easy to access great hotel deals. It's also really easy to get there. It's 23 miles of Atlantic shoreline, so much to do. Kayak, fish, hike, golf. If you're in the state of Georgia, you can make that really easy drive straight down to Daytona, or if you're a little bit further away, you can fly directly into the Daytona Beach International Airport. So now as you start planning your summer vacations, look no further than Daytona Beach. You can find out more information by visiting DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. So this is our summer series that we've been doing. It's the Next Generation, and this is a name that I have been so excited to finally get to. It's Todd Robinson. He's a part of the next generation of UGA athletes. So yesterday we had a very important meeting. And after the meeting was over, I came to Jeff. I was like, I want to do Todd Robinson tomorrow. He's the one I want to talk about because Todd Robinson just has such a crazy story. I mean, he's listed as an athlete, right, out of Valdosta. I saw him play quarterback, but he's going to play safety for Georgia. So how did Georgia watch this guy play quarterback at Valdosta and go, yeah, that's a safety?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Actually, Josh Crawford, who has ties to that area, initially started recruiting him to play running back for Georgia because he was a dual threat quarterback. I believe he ends up throwing for 2,000 yards and rushing for 1,000 yards his junior year. I don't know if he rushes for 1,000 his senior year. Throws a bunch of touchdowns, but very smart player. Shelton Felton, who's been around the SEC a long time, sent a lot of players to Georgia and to the SEC, basically told the staff in Athens that he was legit. He had the speed, and really what Todd did is he went and worked out for Georgia. He camped for Georgia, and they're like, yeah, he's number one in all these highlights here for Valdosta and Wintersville and Titletown, but he's wearing deuce now. He's number 22 for the Dawgs, and you saw him during the early bowl practices, Kaylee, just big. He looks like he's somebody's uncle. He looks like he's very mature, maybe 5 or 6 years older than his actual age, but big, fast, smart, physical. I mean, that's the recipe for a Georgia Dog defender right there. And, you know, he looks the part. Early encouraging signs with Todd Robinson. I don't think he's going to break into the backfield like K.J. Bolden did last year. But he's got a bright future, a very bright future in Athens. All those snaps as a quarterback, he's going to know exactly what quarterbacks are thinking on the other side in the back end for Georgia now.
I mean, you just have to pay attention to his high school stats. At Valdosta, again, Titletown, highest classification program. He was not even a quarterback, and it was 4,406 passing yards, 41 touchdowns, 16 interceptions, 2,108 rushing yards, and 23 touchdowns. Other than just the sheer athleticism, which you can tell by the numbers, what is it that he brings to the table that makes him different?
Well, first of all, it's that down south Georgia boy, GA red clay type blood. Listen, everybody could say it's just a think, or it's just a whisper, or it's just kind of a theory. I think players from down south Georgia play with a chip on their shoulder. They just play tough, hard-nosed football. It's kind of in their blood. I think Todd has a lot of those qualities, and it's funny the way rosters are going to get these days, Kaylee. You might say, hey, Georgia, why don't you throw him there in the red zone, man? You have a great red zone weapon right there. Can He could run the RPO stuff. He could definitely sling that thing, as we saw in the Georgia's highest levels of classification. So this is a thing where I think you look at every player and you've got to say maximum roster value. What else can he do for us? Could he be a running back if safety gets logged down with other players? Maybe. Could he play some red zone quarterback? Maybe. Can he be a safety? Yes. Can he be a star? Georgia looks at him as the ideal star type, the guy that can play the star for Georgia in the SEC. Really physical, really smart, wanted to be a dog. There was not a lot of foolishness with this recruitment. Kaylee, once Georgia offered him, and they offered him early on, and then they made him a priority. I remember he was at G-Day. I remember it was like just the look of his face just a year ago when he's in Athens and he's at G-Day. I was like, it's not going to take long for him to decide to become a dog. And I believe he committed, not in July, but he committed, I believe, June 10th, second week of June. So he didn't need to take a lot of officials. Listen, Shelton Felton, head coach at Valdosta, he'd been a position coach in the SEC. He tells me, this guy's the real deal. And Felton's one of those guys when he told me a story once where Felton's first years, remember he took over for Rush Probst as the interim coach. And after the end of his first season, he said, he looked at Todd and he's like, man, you might want us to do other things, but you're going to be my quarterback. You're going to be my quarterback. We're going to get this thing done. We're going to turn it around. We're going to keep this program going. And that's exactly what Todd Robinson did. In my opinion, a story like that, Todd Robinson is a guy you can build a room around in college.
Well, I think that you bring up an interesting point, because that's where my mind goes too is, I mean, when Malachi Starks came into Georgia, he came in as a linebacker and they made him into a great safety. And for someone like Todd Robinson, who has so much athleticism, he could come in as a safety, but maybe that's not where he ends up, or, they use him for special things. So it's nice to know that Georgia even has that option, but I feel like this is someone who's really going to benefit from learning from someone like KJ Bolden, who also has that same sort of athleticism.
It was funny, Kaylee, because you saw him in the Sugar Bowl practices. We saw him when they were doing yoga in New Orleans, but we also saw him that one time in Athens, and he looked like a guy that had already been there a year or two. Just his build, the way he moved. He was very attentive. He looked like he had already gotten full briefing about what it takes to be a dog, and I just think those versatile, great football players are what Kirby Smart loves. I mean, listen, Kirby, it's almost perfect when Kirby can get a safety type that can play some nickel, maybe play some corner. But, oh, yeah, he played a lot of offense for one of the biggest high school programs in the state of Georgia, in the Southeast still. And he knows all about, like, having the game on your shoulders. He knows all about, like, so many stories. Like, they would be down considerable touchdowns, and Shelton would tell me about Todd. He'd be like, Coach, we got this. Don't worry about it. We got it. And he would fix it.
Fake punt?
He would just lead them back from 21 points down, 14 points down. He's like, Coach, you don't have to worry about this. We're going to win this football game. And then he does it. That sort of athletic confidence, kids would call it swag. I think Todd Robinson has a lot of it.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got to cover him, because he's not the five-star, maybe the flashiest guy, but perhaps the most interesting and brings something to the table that I don't know if anybody else in the 2025 class has. So that is our next generation on Todd Robinson.
Also, it's a nice little story, but top 5 athletes still, top 150 players. It's not like Georgia found this guy that nobody else wanted. I mean, this was a legitimate national prospect as well in Todd Robinson.
All right, so in just a moment, we're going to answer some questions that were left. Before that, Jeff, if you had to put any hypothetical money that you had in your pocket there on something I did this weekend, what would you say I did this weekend?
Oh, Kaylee, you're all about fitness. You're all about your journey. You're all about wellness.
You're going in the totally wrong option.
You made some mature decisions, or you made some fun girl decisions this weekend?
I had a long drink, like I do every single weekend.
Have you found the pineapple one yet?
No, I haven't. I actually talked about that last week on At Large with Connor, that I'm still trying to get my hands on a pineapple one, but something I look forward to every single weekend, especially this weekend, getting to watch basketball with a long drink. It was just kind of a different feel to it. So, Dog Nation, time to get your hands on a Finnish long drink. And if you're not sure where you can do that, the long drink actually makes it really easy. you can go to thelongdrink.com. And at the top, there's a search bar. You can put your city or your zip code, and it'll tell you where the nearest one is. And, your favorite bar that you like to go to, your favorite restaurant, just ask to see if they have it, because so many restaurants and bars are having them now. So make sure to look for it at thelongdrink.com. Again, that's thelongdrink.com. So.
Look at that.
Whoa.
Look at that. You got Stetson here.
That is so good. I wasn't even ready for it.
Of course, the mailman delivers.
All right, well, this is Sentell's Mail. We've got 2 questions today. We'll go ahead and start with the first one here. This is going to come from YouTube. This is from Jansen Roberts 2616. He says, how will the new roster limit of 105 players per the House Settlement Agreement affect this team going into this 2026 recruiting class?
Good question. It's one of those things I think that SEC schools like the Dawgs in Athens are looking at, and they think they know, but they need to have what they think will happen kind of verified and ratified. You're going to get a lot more players Georgia offers that would have been walk-ons in the past, because, Kaylee, that 105 is going to include everybody on scholarship, which is the 85, and then plus 20 really preferred walk-ons, desirable walk-ons. Georgia just offered a young man. Now, I don't know how it's going to work out with running backs, but Will Rejecki, a guy out of Sequoia High School in Cherokee County, his grandfather was a kicker in the 70s for Vince Dooley. I mean, we probably could have included him in the legacy segment too, because his grandfather played there, but played in Athens. But Georgia just offered him. He's about 6 feet, 200 pounds. He had incredible numbers. Everybody that knows Will Rejecki knows that he basically had 4 touchdowns and knocked off Gainesville in the first round of state playoffs last year. So he's one of those offers where I don't believe Georgia has started talking NIL or money with him yet, or whatever, whether it's a PWO or whatever it would be in the new era. But I think you're going to see Georgia offer a lot more players, Kaylee, that and maybe it's just simply a scholarship. Maybe it's enough NIL to cover a scholarship. But I think what's going to go forward, I think the model that a lot of schools are working on is they're not going to pay a premium for all 105. They're going to try to pay premium for like 50, 55, 60 players. And then the rest of them will be a lot of guys that perhaps may have had the skill set to go somewhere like Troy or Central Florida or, Furman, App State, East Carolina, Central Michigan, stuff like that. But those will be like in-state players that just want to go play for Georgia and play for a great program like this, like the one in Athens, and get that type of development. So I think the 105 is interesting because a lot of coaches are worried about how they're going to practice without not enough practice bodies and without their walk-ons. Georgia has made lots of inroads with its walk-ons of late, but I feel like the number 105 is going to get tricky because it's going to be, okay, you're going to pay your starters on both sides of the ball a lot of money, then you're going to pay the reserves, and then you're going to pay your freshmen. So really, you're not going to have enough under that $13 million, Kaylee, to pay a lot of those guys full freight.
All right, I want to go ahead and get to the next question because I think this one brings up a very interesting topic. This comes from WPony714. This is from the Dog Nation Forum. Cornerback athlete Brandon Arrington dropped a top 6 that included Georgia, but he's not taking an official visit to Georgia. Is he just using Georgia for the clout? Is that something that we're going to see a lot more of moving forward?
Kaylee, it sounds like one of your cool friends might have said that. Is he just using Georgia for clout?
I haven't heard that word in a while.
That's a modern type of doing it. But Brandon Dash Arrington, he's the #1 athlete for some, the #1 corner for others. He's out in California. Spider senses, you should tingle and think Dante Williams, California cornerback. Well, Dash Arrington just visited Georgia this week, spent multiple days in Athens on an unofficial. I would expect news of that official visit to drop soon about he's going to give Georgia an official. Kaylee, 6'2.5". He runs a 10.27 at 6'2.5". That is breakneck speed for somebody with a nickname like Dash. I'm going to say stay tuned. I don't think it's for cloud at all. I think Georgia will get one of those official visits. And one of the phrases I heard coming out of Arrington's visit was that he could see himself at a place like Georgia. So Georgia did as it should. Georgia will very much likely get the official there.
So not for clout, not for the show.
Not for the show, maybe for the dough these days. But I mean, USC can't play all those guys out there in California.
That's true. All right, now we'll go ahead and move on to our class breakdown, starting with the offensive side of the ball. We had the chance to talk about a lot of these guys today. Tight end, 4-star Lincoln Keys, and in the wide receiver group, you had Vance Spafford and Brady Marchese, who we didn't talk about just because he is the newest commit, seems to be the most stable. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, you've got the 3-star defensive lineman, Sevin Cloud, cornerback, Jontavius Wyman, and the 4-star safety, Zach Fort. Then we'll move on to our snapshot. The only change from last week is the class rank is down. They were 17 this week. They're at 18, but it's really, really early to stop caring too much about that. So then we'll go ahead and move on to our top targets. Some movement this week. So 2 new names come onto the top targets list from just off the list. You've got the 4-star defensive lineman, Ernest Rankins, and then you've got the 4-star wide receiver, Davion Brown. And then you see that Jay Lamar moves down the list. I believe he was sitting right there at about 6 or 7. Now he's at 11. So you've got a lot of explaining to do is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, so let me see if I can quickly get this rolling for you. Ernest Rankins, I just remembered how big of a priority he is in the class. Others fell. He needed to come just off the list. Davion Brown just visited Georgia this past week in Athens. I think it went swimmingly, Kaylee. He's really considering now Penn State, Georgia, perhaps a little South Carolina in there as well. Jay Lamar just took a 2-day visit to Dabo Town. I guess he drank the Kool-Aid. He loved all things paw and purple, and probably the slide they have really worked for him. He came out of that visit, Kaylee, and this is a guy that grew up a dog, and at times I thought this kid is going to be Georgia no matter what. He came out of that visit calling Clemson his new leader. So, and he's like, when is he going to get back to Georgia? He might even go back to Clemson again before he goes and sees Georgia. So that's an interesting development. What do we like to say and laugh about sometimes in covering these young men? Number 1, recruiting is fluid. Number 2, the only thing more unstable than the hearts and minds of 17, 18, and 19-year-old boys might be something like nuclear physics or quantum physics or something like that.
It doesn't get much more unstable than that.
Get some isotopes and electrons going there.
Also, I feel like recency bias is a thing as well. You know, you just visited, you're high on life. Anyway, not my decision to make. We'll move on to the next page. So really the only movement, James Johnson moves up, but mostly just because Jay Lamar moves so far down. You've got to move some people up. But James Johnson makes the biggest leap out of everyone. Why is that?
He just consistently now, Miami's in the mix now because, Kaylee, you got to follow this stuff. Sometimes you're a little too deep in the weeds. He's moved from a school in Fort Myers, home of Deion Sanders. He's moved to Miami Northwestern now, which is in the heart of Miami. That's where they just won a state championship as well. That's where the head coach is a former Hurricane as well, but that's considered Hurricane territory. He has in the past called Georgia his top school, but this is probably right now, outside of maybe 1 or 2 names, Georgia is as high on James J.J. Johnson as anybody in the 2026 class.
All right, now we're going to move to our top 5, which it has set pretty stable these last couple weeks. You've got the 4-star defensive end, Kamari Brooks, 5-star offensive tackle, Jackson Cantwell, 5-star quarterback, Jared Curtis, 4-star tight end, Mark Bowman, 5-star linebacker, Tyler Atkinson. Is the next time we'll see movement out of this list when Jared Curtis makes his decision?
Maybe not. Maybe 5 and 4 you might see. I know what Miss Kaylee was looking for when she initially saw this list for this week. She wanted to know, did Curtis stay the same? Did Curtis move up? Did Curtis move down? I think Kaylee would have thrown her shoe at the monitor if she would have saw Jared Curtis as the new number 1 this week. Right now, I think things are okay to good in terms of Georgia right now with Jared Curtis, but he's got like 6 more weeks of recruiting and negotiating. Who knows? There's a fascinating question we're going to get to in a future Dog Nation Before the Hedges episode. I guess I'll tease it a little bit by saying, to be totally honest, Kaylee, there's about 7 or 8 names that I think Georgia really wants and that really want to come to Georgia. Then there's about 30 other names that are all probably to use. I got the Masters on my mind here. I got a pimento cheese on my mind right here.
Me too.
I got an azalea on my mind here. But the rest of those players, I would say, are all like 2 or 3 shots off the lead pack of dogs for this class.
All right, now we'll go ahead and move on to our just off the list. not much new for this week. The five-star athlete, Derek Cooper, is there any chance that we see him come back onto top targets?
Almost made it this week, Kaylee. He's in Athens right now for a 3-day trip.
Whoa.
Including his birthday for a midweek visit. When you visit on your birthday, that means something, right?
I think so.
A lot of these names you see going. Craig Dandridge just visited Georgia this week as well. Again, I almost pulled Landon Duckworth off because Landon gave a pretty revealing interview at OT7 in Texas this week. That's a 7-on-7 event where he said basically he'll wait and see how he feels about Georgia after his official visit. Georgia is kind of not there with other schools. It sounds like Georgia would be no better than third with Landon Duckworth. First of those would be Ole Miss. Ole Miss is making him feel like a champion inside the Grove. And then South Carolina, a school he was already previously committed to, he's feeling some type of way about them as well.
Nostalgia. All right, let's move on to the next page of just off the list. You got the five-star cornerback, Jordan Edmonds. Any update on when that decision might be made?
Don't know. I think he's probably going to take some visits, but it does really feel like Alabama. He just visited Alabama this weekend. I think there were some more predictions or crystal balls coming out of Jordan Edmonds after he made another trip. Listen, guys, I've tried to be honest with you guys a lot. Edmonds has always kind of leaned towards Alabama. Georgia and other schools are just trying to draw that out. Gerard Edwards, it seems like Maryland is trying to make a push. He's in Maryland. You've heard Texas A&M with Gerard Edwards. Now you hear Maryland. Maryland is trying to keep 4 or 5 stars within the DMV, which is very interesting because they're going to try and build something there as well. Desmond Green was in Athens again this weekend. I'm telling you, Desmond and his family are in Athens more than some mothers of sorority sisters are in Athens right now. He continues to come back to Georgia, him and his family. It was another great visit going forward.
All right, moving on to our next page of just off the list. Five-star tight end Brock Harris is here just because he will not technically be with this 2026 group. He'll end up being with the 2027s. And then what about an update on our Buford guys, the 3-star interior offensive lineman Graham Houston and the 4-star safety Nasir McCoy?
Yeah, if I could put an up arrow, I'd probably put an up arrow more on Graham Houston than Nasir McCoy. Nasir McCoy is just in Ole Miss. He went to Ole Miss for his birthday as well. Ikene Ugboko, that's another guy that's out of North Carolina. You've heard some really encouraging things about his older brother, Nnamdi Ugboko, who is now who's now at Georgia on the defensive line rotation there as well. So he's a guy that you want to see prosperous things happen for him, and it's looking that way with him in Georgia, especially with how his brother's performing in spring practice.
And now for our last page of just off the list. Last week we talked about the 4-star running back Javian Osborne and how that running back position is shaping up for Georgia right now. I'm very curious to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, Kaylee, if you had to put 7, 8 names in a bag, like one of the things, and I'll be honest, you hear a lot of things still about Savion Hyder with Georgia. That's the #1 running back in the country. It's really, he does a lot of interviews and he shares his feelings that it's really Georgia and it's really Michigan with both of those guys. But I think I know what's going to happen with Michigan in the end. And there are so many, Savion's a great player. He's got a lot of juice. But when I think of players that Georgia's going to have to get in a bidding war to win, I don't think the running back position is going to be it for anybody.
I mean, after what they did with a certain #1 quarterback recruit, I wouldn't put it past Michigan to do just about anything. So, all right, that's going to wrap up our Just Off the List. That's also going to wrap up today's show here on Before the Hedges. As always, I'm Kaylee Mansell with Jeff Sentell. You guys have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you right back here next Wednesday at 7 o'clock.